All right, people, February is here, so we are back in the swing of things as far as new movies go. I am joined by two people who have both been on the stream individually, but never on together. Luke of Luke Reviews and my friend Josh Markler. We are here to talk the brand new M. Night Shyamalan movie, Knock at the Cabin. Gentlemen, before we get started, do you have anything to say?
I just hope there's a good twist in our own episode.
Oh, man, indeed. I'll like the movie, would you say? Josh, anything to say?
I liked it.
All of that more on today's episode of the Talkin TV podcast. What is up, people? We are back in the typical Sunday morning slot. It is another episode of the Talkin TV podcast. I myself, Dom, the movie nerd, am joined once again by Luke of Luke Reviews and my friend Josh, who's been on several different episodes before. We are here to talk about probably the most controversial. I can't even use that word because controversial doesn't even get to describe it. Controversial in the sense that this is the first M. Night Shyamalan movie in 20 years that doesn't follow his normal set of tricks and tropes. We have here A Knock at the Cabin. This is his, if I'm getting the numbers right, this is his 16th overall feature film that he has directed. This is the first time that he has ever worked with Dave Bautista. The premise of this movie is that you have Jonathan Groff and Ben Aldridge portraying a couple that have taken their adopted daughter out to a vacation in a random cabin in the woods. Totally normal atmosphere that people go to when they find themselves being encroached upon by four strangers who commit a home invasion of sorts, but reveal that they are instead there to enact this prophetic vision in order to have one of them ritualistically sacrifice each other in order to prevent the end of the world. Gentlemen, this is a surprise in a lot of senses, but before we get started, I want to start with Josh, and then I'll go to Luke. I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on M. Night Shyamalan. What do you think of his career? What do you think of his body of work throughout? How many movies have you seen? And just what is your general take on him? There are people who love Shyamalan and the originality that he does. There are people who obviously hate him for the 20 plus years of just some very interesting choices that he has taken. Josh, I want to start with you. We watched Old together in the same theater about 2 years ago at this point. So what are your thoughts on the Night, the Shyamalan, if you will?
I've seen Old like 6 or 7 times. I've seen it in theaters. So I really like his so-called bad movies, I guess, you know?
So big fan of Lady in the Water, would you say? Big fan of The Happening?
Happening, yeah. I love The Happening, actually. You know, like when it's cheesy and when like you know the twist is coming and it comes and you're like, oh wow, that's the twist. Kind of like I'm there for that, you know.
What is it about Shyamalan and the fact that he can make a bad movie unlike anybody else? I remember watching Lady in the Water. I was doing a Shyamalan binge for right up to when Old came out because I wanted to catch up on all of his movies. And I think that other than The Last Airbender, which is just straight up bad, everybody knows that one's bad, that there was something just always really fascinating about the way that he could have just something that is really unequivocally pretty bad that's somehow still entertaining, still engaging, still unlike anything that you've ever seen, and the twist somehow keeps you locked in. How is that possible? Like what is the secret? Like I'm still trying to figure it out.
He's an entertaining guy. He knows to some extent he knows what people want to see, you know, even if it's like, oh, this is cheesy, this doesn't really make any sense. Like if you start looking at it a little critically, it doesn't really make any sense. It's still like enough to make you go home and think about it a little bit, you know, like it's the premise is always there where you're going to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest example of that is probably After Earth, strangely enough, which I watched like years after it came out. I remember initially the reaction was like, oh, it's so boring. Jaden and Will are talking like robots, whatever. You know, this movie sucks. And I watched it and I'm like, this is actually really not that bad. Like the whole environmental message of it and like the father-son back and forth. Like I know the Zoe Kravitz death in that movie, spoilers, is like still like surprisingly like gut-wrenching and like really emotionally resounding. I'm like, are people sleeping on this movie? Were people just like kind of letting their bias and baggage? Don't get me wrong, like Shyamalan has earned a lot of the criticism that he's gotten. Like I said, I still cannot explain Lady in the Water at all. The Happening I enjoy, but that's because that's one of the greatest unintentional comedies that has ever been made. Luke, what are your thoughts on M. Night Shyamalan as a filmmaker? And like, because I know you haven't seen as many of his movies, but like just from the ones that you have seen, what is it about his good ones and his bad ones that you think like really continue to make an impact? And what is it that, again, causes him to stand out just as a filmmaker?
Well, I clearly don't have the same passion as Josh here, watching old on repeat. But the ones I have seen, they're obviously very unique to him. Like they're very M. Night in the same way that I think Michael Bay movies are very Michael Bay. Like no one else could make an M. Night movie the way he does. And yeah, he is very hit or miss for me. Just looking at my list here, it's either 4 stars or it's 1.5 stars, or it's somewhere in the middle. But still, whenever a movie of his comes out, you wanna go watch it because it's M. Night, and it could be a hit, could be a miss. Either way, you're gonna have something to talk about.
Yeah, he truly is one of the few filmmakers left in this current internet space where everything is about predictions and trying to figure out what's going to happen in the movie, and 9 out of 10 times figuring out what happens in the movie before the movie comes out. He's one of the few filmmakers that can actually like still surprise you. I remember watching Split for the first time ever back in 2017 and actually being surprised that it was an Unbreakable sequel and them actually keeping that a secret and not having it spoiled ahead of time. I'm like, whoa, how is that even possible that you can still pull this off in the internet age? Yeah, he's always got something. He is one of those filmmakers that always seems to like be trying to work towards something deeper, something a little bit like there's always something below the surface of his movies, whether it's, kind of the religious parable aspect. I feel like is the biggest example, it's such as in movies like in Signs or in movies like, what was the other one that I think? I think this movie, Knock at the Cabin, also had that as well. But every one of his movies, he's always able to tie in. I think the ones where he works his best are when he's doing, like kind of the families falling apart themes, the idea of like, Sixth Sense. It has the single mom thing and then the connection to her mom that died. You have Unbreakable, the connection between him and his son, which also continues through Split. You've got Signs, again, another single dad who lost his wife. I'm seeing a lot of connections here between him and Chris Nolan as far as having to be single dads who've lost their wives. But he's always got that aspect going for him. He's always trying to go for deeper themes that basically like can say, oh, life is not necessarily what you make of it. There is kind of this higher power, but not necessarily in the way that you perceive. I think the divide and kind of where he starts to lose people is when, I'm not going to use the terminology goes up his own ass, but when like there's just something about the way that he writes the dialogue that it's like he's writing it almost like this prophet, essentially. I remember hearing interviews about, from behind the scenes of Lady in the Water, which infamously is known as like one of his worst movies, where it's essentially like the direction that he gave in that movie. It was like, it's very soothing, it's very calming, but it's also like he's talking in a way where it's like he considers himself as a level like above everyone else. And I've heard those comparisons to like George Lucas and James Cameron as well as how he regards himself. But he definitely kind of does have that little bit of smarminess. I am better than you, but not in a way that's like feels like he's talking down to you, essentially. And I think that's kind of always where the divide comes in and is always going to kind of create for this like really hit or miss nature, because on the one hand, yes, you can get something like Signs, which or Unbreakable, which again, people really seem to gravitate towards, people really like, people really understand, people really vibe with. Or you get something like The Happening, which is something where he tries to go a little bit too obvious, and then just the direction that he gives to the actors, it's like straight up George Lucasian, where it's like, what the hell are any of these guys doing? None of these guys are acting or talking like human beings. They're running from like this invisible force that turns out to be wind. Like it's one of those things where it's like, you didn't see the writing on the wall here. Like you didn't quite see what this was going to turn out to be. But I think that all of those problems are solved with this movie here, because strangely enough, I think this movie is a continuation of everything that has been helping Shyamalan in a strange way since he really made the switch over to Universal, because famously he was with Disney for the first couple of movies of his career. Then after a bit of skirmish with Lady in the Water, he took Lady in the Water, I believe, over to Fox, and he bounced around from a couple different studios for his next couple of movies. And then it was after Earth with the Visit that he officially came over to Universal and has done his last this is his 5th movie that he's done with Universal. And I think that has been honestly the best thing for him as far as, having the Blumhouse low budget confined setting feel. I think it's allowed him to come up with some interesting movies. I think not all of them have been hits. I wasn't personally a big fan of Glass, and Old was interesting to say the least. Again, I don't think I would watch it nearly as many times as you, Josh, but Old was definitely something I'm like, okay, this was not what I was expecting. And this definitely went in a lot of directions once we got past all the stupidity of like, oh no, the beach is killing us. Like once we got past that part, like we definitely got into some more interesting parts. That brings us to Knock at the Cabin, which, as I said in my review on Letterboxd, is probably the most existential dread that Shyamalan has gotten yet, which is somehow kind of incredible. But so I wanted to get your guys' take in general. So Josh, walking out of this movie, you watch it, you had the most fresh eyes coming out of Knock at the Cabin. What were your immediate thoughts?
The first thing you guys said was there's no twist. And I didn't even realize until
I think there's a slight twist. I think there's a slight twist, but it's not a twist, but it's like a confirmation.
We'll litigate that. But yeah, Josh, that's hilarious because I had the exact same goddamn reaction. Yeah. It wasn't until like an hour later, I'm like, wait a minute, there was no twist in that movie. What?
Yeah. And then as I was sitting down in the theater before the movie started, I was thinking in my head, like, I'm on Twitter all the time. How have I not seen any spoiler about this? Like he really does do a good job of just keeping things under wrap. But it was like a good apocalypse horror family movie, like the relationship between the parents were good, and I thought the performances were good. But other than that, it's not something that's like gonna resonate with me, I don't think, as much.
Really? That's interesting. I still think the bit about the twist is like the funniest part about that movie, and I'm still amazed that more people aren't talking about it. Luke, your thoughts coming out of the movie?
I think my first thought was, wow, Dave Bautista really hit that little girl with the Bautista bomb in the opening of the movie. That really set the tone. No, I thought, yeah, that was decent. Best movie of 2023 so far, out of the two I've seen.
Out of the four for me.
Yeah, I love end of the world movies. I've seen 2012 more times than I can count. This is a little different kind of scope to that, but yeah, I thought it was decent. Yeah, it was like solid.
Yeah, I think the problem is that like you said, 2012 kind of set the bar so definitively for like end of the world movies. And that was coming off of a string of like Roland Emmerich movies where it's like nature, it's gonna roar at you while it like comes and eats everything alive, where it's like tidal waves making like a wrestling noise as they somehow come over the Himalayas, and John Cusack driving a limousine as LA is full, as whatever part of California that was is falling apart around him. And so I feel like people have that expectation in their heads now whenever they think of end of the world movies. So then when they see a movie like this and it's like, oh, it's about the end of the world, but it's set in a cabin, and they're watching news reports of like crazy nature on TV. Like this isn't exactly what I signed up for, But I think in a way that's what makes it like even smarter than it actually is, because it's not about like the actual end of the world. It's about it's about, to me, again, what Shyamalan does best. It's about the existential dread that people feel that comes from events like this. And I think the movie, for me, does an excellent job of like setting up and positing these questions about like what ultimately is the morale, is the right direction to go in moral wise. Like, is like, do we pick the family and in order to spite the world because the world has proven that it hates us, or do we preserve the world because we believe in the faith of higher humanity, what's it called, and sacrifice someone that we love that's very close to us for that, and the fact that the movie never loses sight of that question, I think it's apparent from minute one. I think the introduction with Bautista and having him be our intro character, I think it's I questioned the choice at first, but once the movie actually locks into its main central theme of asking that question, I think that's when it really hits its stride. And obviously, once the first sacrifice happens, we'll get into that once we get into spoilers. That's when you're like, oh no, this is serious. And like, just throwing it on our head, because I think the movie functions way more as a home invasion movie than a than an end of the world movie. But how it's able to like seamlessly transition between those two genres, like, I mean, we talk all the time about how like most movies of old would pretty much be settled in this one genre, and then they would kind of transition seamlessly between these other two, and how modern movies, I should say, can now seamlessly transition between these other two. I think it's really fascinating whenever a movie can pull it off as seamlessly as it does, as this one does. And I think for my money, at least, I think it does come down to the performances. I think for me, the two standouts are Bautista and and Ben Aldridge as well as the one half of the gay couple. But I think that this is one of the few movies that I've seen in a while where every actor is just pulling their weight and giving a unique performance that like contributes to the plot. You know, the two women that they're with, whose names I'm currently forgetting, Rupert Grint, Jonathan Groff is the other half, who's got a much more subtle and underplayed performance, but still continues to just rock it. He has crushed every single role that I've seen him in since I really, found out who he was in Mindhunter. And also, strangely enough, like making probably the best use of the M. Night Shyamalan child direction as well, because M. Night Shyamalan kind of coined the, directing children like they're robot aliens / adults in children's bodies type of thing that has really been going on since his discovery of Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense. But I think this is probably like the best use of it, because like she is both acting like a little girl, but also not. Like, it's always weird for me with kids in Shyamalan movies, because I know a lot of people criticize that, but like, oh, they're robots. Oh, they don't act like how kids act. But like, he always weirdly uses kids as like, for lack of a better word, like the guiding North Star for the adults who are usually suffering from some sort of existential and moralistic crisis in the movies. And I actually think it works more oftentimes than people like to give him credit for. I think the only time it really doesn't work is with the kids and Lady in the Water. I keep bringing that movie up because that movie is just so bafflingly ridiculous. But like the Jade and Will dynamic in After Earth, I think actually works a lot better than people give it credit for. I think the kids in Signs are a little bit too robotic, but like they're also like still processing their mom's death, and they're processing it in the way that like little kids would. So like I think that one, it works as well. There aren't really that many kids in the village, but the village is a little bit of like a different scenario. But what did you guys think of the performance from the daughter in this movie? Josh, I'll start with you.
It was good. I didn't really think about it much after the movie was over. I felt like for like maybe the good third of it, she was just kind of hiding her face into her dad's shoulder, so that kind of evened her out. In the parts where there was like dialogue heavy, like the conversation with Batista, I thought she displayed enough emotion. Like she felt scared when she had to feel scared, to the point where I thought it wasn't distracting. Like I don't like kid performances where I'm distracted by their performance. So overall, I had no complaints with it.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Like I said, kid performances and things are generally hit or miss. There's some instances where it's like, oh, I like that, but then other people don't, because it's like, oh, that's not how kids act. And I'm like, yeah, but kids act in a certain way. It's like, remember, this is a movie. You want your kids to act a certain way in movies because you want your characters to be, interesting and to not be stupid and stuff. And like most of the time, kids can kind of be dumb. So it's always like a weird push-pull balance, like tripwire thin balancing act. Luke, what was your thoughts on the daughter's performance in this movie? Because she ends up playing a pretty crucial role, especially towards the end.
Yeah, I think she was good. I think going back to that first scene, like she played a kid well. Because if Dave Bautista came up to you and you were an adult, you'd be like, "Hey, fuck off."
Yeah.
But a kid would be like, the kid would be like, just, "Oh, hello, big man."
Yeah.
Like they wouldn't really know what to do. So that subtlety kind of, I think, was good. And the rest of the movie, yeah, she was just there. She didn't have a monologue or anything, so she just did her job, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of interesting because like there's a lot of flashbacks in this movie in order to flesh out the couple's relationship and their adopting of their daughter, and there's a lot of subtle foreshadowing to the idea that not so subtle foreshadowing to the idea that that's tied in with the central theme about kind of, again, like the world they're going to stick together throughout all this adversity that the world is going to throw at them, right? It's this idea that again in a world where you are viewed as being different, in a world where you are viewed as being of not normal, there's always going to be reminders of that, no matter how starkly steadfast you stick to your values. And I wanted to transition though into the Dave Bautista of it all, because he has been doing quite a lot of marketing for this movie just in general. He's been very vocal in the last couple of months, just given, the amount of stuff that he has popped up in, Glass Onion, the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. He's been very vocal about the fact that he is done with the role of Drax and with Marvel after the forthcoming Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. He has stated that he wants to just be the best actor possible. And I think that so far, it's funny because there's been a lot more people who have been like disagreeing with me than agreeing, but I think that I think that so far, like, I mean, I haven't been disappointed by a single performance of his. It's funny. I remember talking about this with Chris when we were doing the Glass Onion podcast. And I think the most interesting thing that he brought up on that show was that Dave Bautista may have used WWE as a way to like get into acting. And I'm like, if that's the case, that is absolute genius on his part, because yeah, he's a really freaking good actor. You know, for a guy that's his size, I think he's able to deliver a lot of gravitas, a lot of depth, a lot of surprising, like, stark emotion, especially for the role that he plays in this movie, which is a role that I feel like in any other movie would kind of be a joke part, where he's just like this massive, burly guy who is revealed to be an elementary school teacher and a part-time bartender. You know, there's a lot of ambiguity around the movie surrounding whether he has like some more sinister intentions that he's letting on. But again, the biggest surprise is that, again, he is just like a genuinely normal guy who wants to do good and wants to do the right thing. And yeah, it's always this like fascinating dichotomy that comes at, and I think that's what allows this to be like one of his more in-depth and heartfelt performances. You know, I mean, I guess you could make the accusation that he's one note for sure, but like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the gentle giant demeanor has never been more apparent than it is here. I don't know, Josh, what were your thoughts on that?
I feel like he's feeling like the Rock adjacent role that's been vacant, you know, like WWE star, big, huge guy that's now like super nice and kind. Like, even looking at his past couple movies, he did like a babysitter big guy movie. He's done a superhero movie. Like, that's kind of all the stuff The Rock was doing before he became like Mr. Action Film. He's good. I like Dave Bautista, you know, like he wants to be a serious actor. I say go ahead and keep going for it. Throughout the movie, I didn't like his breathing. Honestly, his breathing he breathed so heavily and so much that like his dialogue did get a little bit like chunky. But I thought when he was delivering the dialogue, like, I wanted to pay attention. He was one of the more, like, he grabbed the screen presence better than some others.
Yeah, I remember obviously in the marketing, the big marketing factor for this movie is like, ooh, Dave Bautista doing an M. Night Shyamalan movie. So you can imagine my surprise when, I mean, I believe he is like either one of the first two characters that we see on screen, but this movie ends up being like much more of an ensemble piece than I thought. Like, I thought at one point it was going to be centered around him or centered around like one of the other character figures, and it ended up being, I thought it distributed its time amongst the characters very evenly, and I thought very, very nice and neatly, you know. And I thought, particularly once it shifted, and I guess if I was to pick a central character, it would be the Ben Aldridge character. But like, I don't really feel that there was like a central character in the movie. And so I always like when, you know, when big superstars, because, you know, the thing with The Rock has to be front and center of every single one of his movies. That's why he had the infamous falling out with Vin Diesel over the Fast and Furious movies. But Dave Bautista has always been content with being in a supporting part. You know, obviously, you know, everyone went nuts when he was cast as Beast Raven for Dune, and he's in that movie for like maybe 5 minutes of screen time, not even. I don't know. Like, he's not in that movie a whole lot. He kind of only just serves as this imposing force. So that already like is a good sign to me when an actor, for lack of a better word, like knows that they can deliver and have just such this imposing presence without the need to have that much screen time. But I think the fact that what's most compelling about his performance in this specifically is the fact that he is the one that is constantly, strange enough, like the moral center of the movie. Like, he's the one that is constantly asking, like, you must make this choice, you know, save the world or be selfish and save yourselves. You know, when he's constantly relaying different things from his own experience. And there is always times where he could like just lose it and go nuts and start to question things, but he always remains steadfast in his beliefs. And you're always waiting for like the other shoe to drop and for like something to be revealed. And it never is. And it, like, in any other movie, I'd be annoyed by that. But here, like, I'm okay with it. You know, like, Luke, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, Dave Bautista is in Dune. He's going to be more in the second one. He has a much more prevalent role. And I saw a thing yesterday that Villeneuve wants to do another thing with him. I think he would be the great lead in Villeneuve's next movie, Rendezvous with Rama. But going back to Bautista as an actor in general, I think him, John Cena, and Dwayne Johnson, they're like the big three. Yeah.
They're the trifecta of wrestlers turned actors.
Yeah, and two of them have been in Fast and Furious. They approached Bautista for Fast X, I believe, to be the villain. He said no. And they got Jason Momoa instead, which is, it's a decent replacement. And it's clear to see that, he's challenging himself. He wants to be a more serious actor, and I think he's clearly getting there. I'm going to say this: he'll get a Academy Award nomination within 5 years.
I honestly, I'm with you on that. I think
maybe even less.
Yeah, well, because the thing about him is that he's making the decision that I feel like Cena and The Rock have not. Where Cena and The Rock, to me, after they got to a certain point where they're like, okay, we're movie stars now, the Rock really doesn't have his own muse because the Rock is just like, okay, he's just the Rock. He is singularly the movie in and of itself. And John Cena, it took a while, but John Cena finally found his muse. John Cena was bouncing around for a little while, trying to get like a superhero part, and he finally found his muse with James Gunn, obviously, who I think has put him to great effect. But the thing about Batista is, obviously, it's sort of similar enough to John Cena. Batista, obviously, he found his muse with Gunn, but Batista has been adamant about just wanting to work with great directors and do good work. He wanted to work with Denis Villeneuve. He wanted to work with Rian Johnson. Obviously, when those guys came calling, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to turn them down. And I thought he had probably, like, again, an incredible opening scene at the beginning of Blade Runner. I think his part, strange enough, I think that he might be my favorite part of Glass Onion in a strange way of that ridiculously over-the-top movie, because that's just, again, it's a movie where he knows exactly what the part is that calls for. And again, you just look at the types of parts that he has contributed since his breakout as Drax. Like, it has been really interesting. Even Army of the Dead, which should have just been like another generic action shoot 'em up part, I even think that he is actually like really good and gives like a pretty decent performance in that. I know people are pretty split on that, but yeah, Batista is a guy who I'm really, really excited to see what he does going forward. And I love the fact that he's been playing it very smart. He's been pitching it like, yeah, this is me. I am a separate entity than Drax. I'm a separate entity than WWE. I have my own persona. I have my own goals and everything. And I think that's been probably the smartest part about his career choices so far. So bringing it back to the movie, Knock at the Cabin. So obviously this movie's got a pretty heavy stint on religion. And I did make a prediction earlier on in the movie where I'm like, once I saw like, because obviously so in order to get a little bit more into spoilers, essentially what happens is that once the four people, that be Dave Bautista, Rupert Grint from Harry Potter, and the other two people who I'm going to look them up right now because that being portrayed by Abby Quinn and newcomer Nikki Amuka Bird as the characters of Redmond, Adrian, and Sabrina to complement Dave Bautista's Leonard. I made a prediction earlier on, like once I saw like the natural disasters started happening, where I'm like, I leaned over to my friend who I was watching it with in the theaters, and I'm like, oh, these are the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And that ended up being a little bit way more true than I thought. They didn't necessarily get into the prophecies and the visions that they were having. But after a certain point, I'm like, they don't need to. I'm actually kind of like happy with where they are right now. I kind of like the idea of them just kind of relaying what they've seen rather than having us actually see what they've seen, because I think it leaves it a little bit more open to interpretation, because again, the thing that Ben Aldridge is trying to convince Jonathan Groff of the entire time in order to not get him to buy into it is it's like they've been looking at their watches. They already knew that this stuff was going to happen. They've just been pre-planning it, because they're suffering from delusions of grandeur or something. So I wanted to get your guys' take on, kind of for lack of a better word, the morality clause of it, where this idea of, the idea of these prophecies, these visions, the religious parables, what M. Night is trying to necessarily say about these. So Josh, I wanted to start with you, which is that, for lack of a better word, and this is kind of, again, where I have a problem, like, proselytizing it, but, what's it called? What are your thoughts on, like, kind of just the overall ambiguous nature of it? Would you possibly have liked to have seen more of, maybe seen a little bit more backstory of what brought the four together rather than just having us having that told to us?
Well, you harked on the religious aspect of it. I was harking more on the like political echo chamber aspect of it, because I like the dichotomy of like the one partner, I cannot remember his name, Ben Aldridge.
Yeah,
he kept like obviously saying that they were stuck in an echo chamber and that they all met on this forum, and they kept taking these buzzwords that they used as signs that they were like some kind of like far wingers to whatever side,
right,
that got radicalized. But towards the end, like when all the evidence was in his face, he became the one that was radicalized,
right.
And I thought that was a little bit more important than the religious, like, yeah, the four horsemen and stuff. But I didn't see all that. Seemed like he wasn't going to show us that anyway. Like M. Night Shyamalan was not going to give us that background, so I didn't even give enough effort to really care about when it was going to happen. Like what was going to happen with that. Right. So I just kind of took that at face value. Yeah, the religious aspect of it, it didn't really stick with me. Like it wasn't enough for me.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. No. That makes sense more so too. Again, there are a lot of trending buzzwords as well in this film. Again, certain of aspects, especially once you got into the scene with the bar and again, probably the most unintentionally funny reveal when you have Ron Weasley from Harry Potter playing a Trump supporter. I thought that killed me. I'm like, that's too much. And the fact that it's like they're like, yeah, he's like, that's the guy that attacked us at the bar. Again, like they leave these little breadcrumbs that they continue to tie in at the end. And the fact that it's like for the most part, I think with the exception of the Rupert Grint character, every one of the people who break into the house, they are like. Again, like one's a school teacher, one's a nurse, one is one is a single mom. slash line cook. They've all got these very like not passive positions, but like positions of like wanting to help make lives better for people, and even versus the what's it called? Versus the couple that we see. I'm looking up their names right now. Eric and Andrew. The Ben Aldridge and Jonathan Groff characters. One of them is I believe is a corporate lawyer, and the other one is what's it called? And the other one also has like another, but they've got like pretty like upscale, swanky, right? Yeah, very white collar job. So I find it interesting that's actually a good point that you bring up, where it's like, yeah, again, the idea of like somebody who at the beginning of the film is perceived as the marginalized group ends up being the more radical ones by the end. I think that's a very interesting transition. Luke, what are your thoughts on, maybe for lack of a better word, the messaging of the movie?
Yeah, so I think that the whole thing was the twist for me. Was I was fully with the Ben Aldridge character. Like I didn't believe it at first. There's a rule like once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. I'm like, when the third, I don't know, plague happened, then I was like, okay, this is maybe actually there for real. So I was following along with the characters in that sense. But yeah, I think that more belief kind of thing resonated with me. That what does it take to believe something like that? For people to show up to your house, they say, "Ooh, this is the thing." Why would you believe them? I think that was the most engaging part for me,
especially when they have to forcefully break into your house and tie you up and then line up in front of you and then commit ritualistic sacrifice in order to make you believe it, where it's like, okay, so we're watching this person get viciously murdered in front of us, and then 2 seconds later we're watching a horrible an effect of a tsunami or a plague that seemingly comes out of nowhere. And it's like, all of this.
I love a good tsunami.
Planes fall. Even better. That's how he was getting a little bit Roland Emmerich, when it's like, wow, you have all these people that are just standing on the beach. They're seeing the tsunami come towards them.
Yeah, and run.
I wanted to know who was holding that camera. That just let themselves be swallowed up by the tsunami. I'm like, wow, that guy was truly willing to die for his art right there.
Cameraman always survives.
Always, somehow. Yeah. Well, the cameraman might not, but the camera always does somehow. Even if under like 300,000 pounds of water pressure, and somehow the camera survives and doesn't break. And that's where I'm like, okay, there's the Shyamalan that we all know and love, just following those incredible rules of logic right there. But I mean, after a certain point, you gotta wonder. It's like there's literally planes falling out of the sky and lightning strikes. Like, at what point are you gonna, like, for me? Yeah, and again, that can still be attributed to the theme, because at that point, again, it's like Aldridge is like so radically opposed to wanting to believe in this that he's literally to the point where he's just endangering people now. And so I thought that part really, really worked well. And for me, probably the biggest surprise was just how emotionally hard hitting it was. Like after a while, I mean, I think they did such a solid job with these characters that every time one of these characters died, like, I really felt that in my core, and I legitimately felt bad for them and felt sorry for them. Like when the one girl, when the what's it called? When the Abby Quinn character, when she died, and she's just babbling on and on and on about her life, and I'm like, okay, she's giving me like a little bit of like crackhead vibes here. Is this really real? And then at the end, once they find the truck and they're going through the pictures and they find that, everything they said was true, I'm like, oh wow, okay then. Like it's I don't know. There's like I don't know. Maybe this just might be like me attempting to like thrust the fact that I'm going to acting school into every single one of these podcasts, but like there was something like really believable about the way that like these 4 are just characters who ultimately realize that they have been chosen for this higher purpose, but still do have lives that they have left behind. and that they really are going to miss. And ultimately, inevitably, because you got to think about it, right? If they've had these prophecies and these visions of how this event is going to go, they kind of already know that they're all going to die, because they know that it's going to take all of them dying, all four of them dying, to get these two to believe that this is a sacrifice. I think the only thing that I wish they would have gone a little bit more in depth with is what's it called? I understood like kind of why they picked these two, but kind of what led them to the location base. You know, like I said, this isolated cabin in the middle of the woods. You know, there's been a lot of other movies that have like done some some religious allegory stuff about like an isolated setting seemingly in the middle of nowhere. But obviously, Jacob's Cabin in Lost, I think, being the most obvious example. And then there was that Sam Worthington movie that came out a couple of years ago. But I think I just wanted a little bit more of that, of like what led to this specific location, because something that I thought was going to happen that did not end up happening was how this I believe they mentioned it, other points like this happening in history, but I wish they had gone like maybe a little bit more in depth and like maybe shown that like, okay, like this cabin was this place where certain like ritualistic sacrifices like this were happened in the past, and how maybe they were the next in a long line. I wish they had gone a little bit more in depth with that, because
I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword. It could either really elevate it or really ruin it. I think.
Okay.
It could go either way.
Well, we'll play devil's advocate a little bit then. What's a way that it might not have worked? But what's a way that it might not have worked though?
I don't know. I think maybe if you go into over-explaining it, and I think the ambiguity helps sell it. It makes it more engaging. Like the less you know, the more interested you are. It's like a magic trick. If as soon as they reveal how it is, you're like, oh, that's a bit boring. Right. So I think it's better not knowing.
Yeah, like you said, it's very hit or miss. It could go either way. Like I said, maybe just like a little, like maybe a sentence, maybe something of information, where it's like, oh, this is not the first time this has happened here. I'm trying to remember. Was there a point where they mentioned they're like, oh, there have been moments like this throughout history, or no? They never said that.
No, this is not 2012, Dom, where Woody Harrelson tells them this has happened before.
There have been moments
when the planets align.
And where the planets align and all that, and then the portal opened and said monsters come out of it. Like there's something like that.
Maybe 2012 is better than we give it credit for. If it does what we ask of Knock at the Cabin.
Maybe. Look, all I know is that one is a very entertaining movie that people have come back to over and over again. Josh, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, they had a couple throwaway lines that had happened before, but I didn't think we needed to know anything about that. In the beginning of the movie and like the opening credits, there were like files that I was kind of paying attention to. That had nothing to do with
that kind of really did come back around.
He mentions that like, oh, we drew the things that we saw or something. Batista said it at some point, but it was like a
spin test.
Like you don't even remember the drawings anymore. Like there was big font in front of it, anyways.
Yeah, really big, gorgeous font.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was very confusing that sense. And I'm like, I need a little bit more, all the moral righteous posturing and all that. And that's good, but like I need a little bit more in that sense. But other than that, like I really enjoyed it. Otherwise, I thought it was very compelling. I thought the way that they were able to maintain the tension. Bottle movies, I know that they've been what's it called? I know they have made fun of bottle movies for the longest time, but I think that for me at least, I think this is probably one of the best ones that I've seen in a while. Because for me, I think the worst instance of a bottle movie is when like I start to become aware of the fact that they're trying to leave, but they can't, and I think this one did an excellent job of like always maintaining that tension of, okay, like, they obviously can't leave. And there were a couple of escape instances, a couple of easy tropes where it's like, oh, little girl ran and Dave Bautista's chasing her. And I'm like, okay, so she's going to go behind the tree. She's going to look out a couple times. And they did it like a couple times. They were really rubbing it in there. He's going to look at a couple times. And Bautista's going to magically, his big ass is magically going to somehow be right there. And he's going to sneak up right behind her. And she's not going to hear him at all. And I'm like, of course, because this has to be in every single one of these things. It's a trope that's so dumb, but they won't get rid of it. I think that the moment for me, though, that hit the hardest was at the end when Funky Shoes comes on the radio when they stop at the diner. And then like he turns on the radio and Funky Shoes is playing, and like that was kind of like their family bonding song. Then he turns it off, and then she turns it on, and turns it off, and then he turns it on again. That was like a really awesome moment of like, wow, talk about like saying so much with absolutely nothing. Yeah, I thought that was really nice. And again, like about 40 minutes after I walked out, I'm like, oh my god, there wasn't a twist. At least I'm like, it's mind blowing. It's completely insane because Shyamalan is a guy that is known for his twists. So. Before we get out of here, I wanted to know, out of your Shyamalan rankings, where this ranks. Because, Josh, have you seen every one of Shyamalan's movies or no?
Not all of them, no. For sure not all of them.
But he's seen Old.
But he's
Six
seen
times.
old.
Yeah, I've
6
seen old. I've seen
times.
old enough for all of them.
I still think the greatest thing about that movie is Mid-Size Sedan. I think that is the single.
I do want to say, well, the actress in Knock at the Cabin was also an old Nikki Amuka Bird. She was an old.
Oh my God,
I was thinking of where I knew her from.
she's Ken Leong's wife, the one that was having the seizures, right?
Yeah.
Holy shit. That's where I recognized her
Oh,
from.
yeah.
I couldn't put my finger on it. I had to.
Wow. And you've seen old so many times and you
Yeah, I
didn't
know.
realize it. Oh man, yeah. I was looking at that movie. I was looking at her the whole time and I'm like, do I feel like I've seen her before? I'm like, is she the one that said it's what's it called? I'm like, is she the one that what's it called?
I thought she didn't get out.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm like, wait, is that
I
Betty
thought she
Gabriel
could
from
Get
Get
Out.
Out? Yeah, exactly. Mine of the same thought train. But yeah, I thought that she was in Get Out and she wasn't. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. But yeah, my problem with old is that after a certain point, like once everybody started dying, that was when the movie just got like really, really stupid. Like just like with the one girl whose limbs got all twisted around, and the one girl that classic clip.
Yeah.
And Ken Leong dying by drowning. And then the funniest part of that movie when they cut Rufus Sewell's arm and he like rotted in real time. That was like some shit right out of Indiana Jones. That had me dying laughing. But then once the parents died, I'm like, oh man, this is where it gets this is where it gets really sad. So Josh, where would you rank this in your overall Shyamalan filmography? Knock at the Cabin, not old.
I don't like Unbreakable or that whole Split series. I'm sorry, guys. So I'm saying top 5. I'm saying it's behind like The Happening, The Village, and Old. But
so you're just a fan of all the bad Shyamalan movies, all the bad ones. You're like, yes, all the way up there.
More
like,
power to you.
Okay, I got to hear your guys' rankings because I got to know what your favorite Shyamalan movie is.
Well, Luke, how about you give yours first, and then I'll say mine for last. Mine's probably going to be the most traditionalist.
Well, I've only seen 7, but going upwards, I have The Last Airbender, Old, Glass, Signs, which I'm not huge on, like a lot of people recently in one group chat of mine are, so I'm just kind of alone there. And Don, I'm just reading your review, and I think that sums it up perfectly.
Yeah.
So Airbender, Old, Glass, Signs, Knock at the Cabin, Unbreakable, and Split.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I personally have never been a fan of Signs since I watched it. I thought it was like, I thought that was one that, unlike this movie, kind of ambled on a little bit too much about the existential nature and didn't actually have enough plot happening. And I thought that the kind of the twists and the reveals with the aliens and how it panned out and ultimately how it ended up mattering. So I can't say that Signs is one of my favorite. I have Signs, out of the 13 movies of his that I've seen, I have Signs ranked at 9. I have above that, I have The Happening at 8, Old at 7, The Visit at 6. I have The Village at 5. I think The Village is very underrated. I think that movie is ruined by the fact that the trailers spoiled the twist, but the twist in and of itself, I think, is actually not that bad. I think it has to do with like how the positing and the build up and how they incorporate the twist into the movie. But I don't hate the twist around The Village. And then this is 4, Knock at the Cabin, and then I have Split, Unbreakable, and The Sixth Sense as my top 3. Overall, I mean, The Sixth Sense. There's a reason why he was regarded as the next Spielberg when that movie came out. And I still think the funniest part about that movie is the executive who bought the rights for The Sixth Sense for Disney to produce did it without Disney's approval. And so basically, Disney, like after a certain point, was like, "Wait a minute, we have this movie that's on the production docket. And this director has final cut. We didn't even approve this." And needless to say, that executive was let go. But like that just shows like the power of that script. So before we get out of here, final thoughts and star ratings on A Knock at the Cabin. Josh, starting with you.
We go out of 4 out of 5 here.
Out of 5 here. We're not Siskel anywhere. We don't do out of 4.
I'm gonna say a 3.
3. Wow.
3, yeah.
Got it. That is a lot lower than I was expecting. Luke, what is yours?
I'm sitting at a high 3.
At a high 3. Wow. Lot of average ones. I gave this one a 4. I gave this one a 4. I was very, very impressed with the direction this movie went. Like I said, it was mostly because, again, I always am willing to give a movie that extra edge if it turns out to not at all be what I expected. And I'm not going to say I knew what to expect going into this, but I expected it to be a lot more sinister in its nature than it initially led on. And the fact that this was, again, more of a, for lack of a better word, a conflict of niceness, who was essentially trying to be the more nice, and the fact that, again, it's a home invasion movie where the home invaders, I ended up kind of almost being more sympathetic towards than the people who they were actually, infringing upon. I think for a movie to pull off, I think for that to be the twist of the movie, rather than have it be some last minute third act gotcha reveal, that ultimately doesn't add anything to the movie, I think, is probably the most surprising and for me the most hard-hitting thing for me. So that's why I gave this a 4 out of 5. I was very much a fan of it. We'll see how this goes. Like I said, the first third of the year is always for me the most interesting, because that's when it's like, again, we still get a lot of blockbusters, but for the most part, that's still unknown territory, you know, and the trajectory and overall quality of the year is still being determined. So will 2023 be a better year for movies than 2022 was? I think time will tell on that. But for right now, that was our thoughts. That was our review of M. Night Shyamalan's A Knock at the Cabin. So, Josh, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Bacon Pizza 7 on Twitter and Mosh Jarkland on Instagram.
I love these names that you come up with. Sooner than later, we'll actually have a nickname for you, but I'm not calling you Bacon Pizza on here. That's not happening. Luke, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Surprisingly enough, you can check out my YouTube channel, Luke Reviews.
Yes,
there's
finally
new life has been breathed into it once again. My top 10 movies of last year, and I'm working on my next entry as we speak.
Awesome.
Otherwise, on Instagram, Luke_reviews, or on here, sooner rather than later.
Absolutely, of course. And you're gonna, of course, follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Follow the at Official Talkin TV podcast across all platforms. Like I said, we have been very active on TikTok and YouTube Shorts lately. So if you're into that sort of stuff, check that out. This episode will be available to listen to and stream on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow morning. Be sure to also check out my ranking of every M. Night Shyamalan movie, including Old, that is still available to watch on YouTube. And for myself, from Josh, from Luke, as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. See you guys next time.